from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien talking about the wheat market's surprisingly mild response to the USDA's winter wheat seedings report. And he'll comment on the strong local basis bids for grain sorghum in comparison to those for corn during this week's grain market segment with Dan. Then one of the featured speakers at the Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference yesterday out of North Carolina State University, Jason Ward, talks about the collection of data from today's farm equipment and field operations and emerging ideas on how to maximize the use of that data to you, the producer's advantage. Further ahead on Kansas Agricultural Weather, K-State's Mary Knapp. Right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Well, the USDA shared its first estimate of winter wheat seedings among a raft of grain reports last Friday, and we're going to take that up first as we bring you this week's grain market analysis and comment from grain market economist Dan O'Brien of K-State Research and Extension. He is, of course, at his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. So as you look at those wheat seedings numbers, they didn't exactly fall along the lines of pre-report expectations, Dan.
No, a lot of discussion was going on prior to the reports that, we could see 1 million, 2 million acres less than we had seeded here in 2016 for harvest and 2017 for the winter wheat numbers. And when those numbers came in on the 12th at 32.6 million acres, and just down from about 32.7 the year before, it was a surprise to the market. And there was at least one day when things moved sharply lower. It's standing back from that announcement and trying to have a perspective on what that's showing. Still, I think that the market saw that number as a surprise relative to last year, probably obscures the fact that the previous year we were at 36.1, 36.2 million acres, and in 2017, again, it dropped to 32.7. Now down to 32.6 is at least the measure that came out of the winter wheat seedings report. So we're still down about 4 million acres overall for winter wheat seeding. The Kansas number was a bit of a surprise, showing 7.8 million acres of winter wheat having been seeded, actually up 200,000 from the previous year.
As opposed to down from the previous year as most anticipated.
Yeah, you and I had talked earlier that if there would be a surprise on the U.S. aggregate numbers, and probably in Kansas as well, it would be that there wouldn't be a decline. Well, the thing that we identified as the surprise to come was exactly what happened, at least in the state of Kansas. Even that, if that number proves to be correct, we'd be at 7.8 million acres. That's still down from 8.5 back 2 years ago, again, seeded in 2015 for harvest in 16, and still along with the downward trend we've been seeing. So I don't doubt that when we try to understand what had gone on there with that number, that we had some moisture ahead of seeding last fall and cash flow needs. I don't doubt that we may very well have seeded that many acres. I wonder to what degree we were aggressive in our fertility. Are we planning on that crop full bore all the way through to harvest, or did we put the crop out there as a means to be in position? Should we make it through the winter without any problems and something could happen in the wheat market to then come in and fertilize that crop more fully out into the spring, go ahead and take it on to fruition, et cetera, as opposed to having a crop that's sitting there in position. And if we do see other crop markets that would affect what we could plant into those acres next spring start to shoot higher for whatever set of reasons, i.e. corn, grain, sorghum, soybeans, some parts of the country, sunflowers, to go ahead and change the crop. So Kansas crop producers, in their well-established risk management approaches, apparently went ahead and put a crop out there, and no doubt are going to wait and see what actually comes about in the spring to see if they stay with that crop, prospects change. And if they don't, well, yeah, they'll take that crop onto harvest. If they do, then they may have the option to go ahead and switch acres to something else. But now it seems that we kept about the same amount of acres as last year, and we'll see where we go once we get out into March, April, May time frame.
And though it would maybe seem that those higher than expected wheat acres in the report would bring some weight to bear on the markets, if you look at futures this past week, and you could say this of the corn contracts as well, there seems to be an element of stabilization there, Dan.
It seems that the markets took these reports pretty much in stride, had a day or so of movement, and have said, well, I guess that's what we have, and are now moving on without a lot of change in the basic ideas they had about supply-demand balances and price trends actually coming into the market. For the corn market, we had gotten down to about 345 or so, and at the low side here, closed yesterday about 351.5. Actually, compared to where we were on January the 4th, it's almost the identical price. For the wheat market, we had been up trading about 440 or so for a week or so prior to that report. After the reports come in, and we drop down, come back now to about 429.5 on yesterday's close, so down about a dime. For soybeans, again, we've got some South American weather watching going on in that. But again, day of the report or so, we had dropped down to about 945, back up on yesterday's close to about 973, trading up towards that top of about 978, et cetera, that we've been looking at through most of the month, latter part of December on into January. So it seems that we've taken the numbers coming out of these reports in stride, and have deduced that not a lot really has changed, at least yet, in terms of the direction of the markets. Puts us in a position really to be watching for the next set of factors that'll come into play, and that could be major market movers, and of course that would be the type of weather and crop conditions for wheat planting conditions for the other crops that we'd see as we move off into the late winter, early spring time frame.
And that leads us to the conversation that is going on now about La Nina and how long this weather factor will last. Your colleague from Iowa State University, Elwyn Taylor, has been speaking about this on the circuit lately, and you've been watching what he has to say about the pending impact on yields for our row crops.
There are different sources of information on La Nina and its weather impact. When you look at the official line out of the National Weather Service, they have a La Nina advisory out and have made statements that it seems that weather in the United States would be affected through the rest of this winter, but are really pretty hesitant to say anything beyond that. My good friend and colleague and actually advisor when I went to Iowa State, Elwyn Taylor, I guess, has made his career in looking towards long-term impacts. And it's probably more bold to make statements than the National Weather Service is with regard to this. Anyway, he's in the ag media, as reported in significant meetings around Iowa and elsewhere in the U.S., basically making a statement that right now with La Nina in place, that we have about a 70% chance of a below-trend line yield. Now, a below-trend line yield could be half a bushel. It could be 2.5 bushel or more. And at that point, then you ask the question, well, what's the trend line yield? The yield the last several years, on the low side, we got down to 168 bushels an acre. But we've had several years in a row, and take that one out, about 3 or 4, where we've been at 170 or above. But the long-term trend line yield is closer to 168, 167, something like that, just depending on how you want to calculate it. So we're not in the business of trying to bang the drum to try to get the market to pay attention to weather risk and to bid things up. Rather, the point is that as we sit here today, we've now shifted gears after that January report away from really concerns about what last year's crops were, and now we're paying more attention to the pace of usage, i.e. the focus on exports, as well as other areas of usage, and are trying to peer forward to the time frame when we'll have to overtly, objectively, and directly try to assess what type of weather risk we'll have for these 2018 summer crops. And with the La Nina pattern, we have more risk of something happening apparently, according to these established climatologists, than we would if we were in an El Nino weather pattern, the other side, the flip side of all this. Obviously, when you look at the markets, we're not seeing a lot of response to any of that right now, but the time frame to consider weather risk is all out in front of us, and we just have to get through January and February to get out to where these factors have more of an impact on the psyche and thinking of the market.
And if you would, Dan, speak to one more thing, something that you're keeping close tabs on, the comparison of corn to grain sorghum bids at our delivery points around Kansas, and the basis there is leaning sorghum's way.
Almost in a head-scratching fashion here, we've seen 2 or 3 weeks now where grain sorghum actual shipments are low, but when you look back at the basis bids in south central Kansas in particular, you see, some tremendous bids. So there was a bid on yesterday's closes in Topeka at 50 over the March contract, and in the same community, the corn bid was 18 under the March contract. Salina, again, 20 over March for a bid there out of that community. The corn bid yesterday was 35 under. So there must be some anticipation of export movement or some base of demand, and it's likely exports for grain sorghum to keep those bids up as elevators try to procure that product. Even out in the western part of the state, where at least as I've been watching things, as we've all been watching them, we have seemed to be more even. Here on yesterday's closes, you look at bids in Garden City, the top bid was about 15 under for corn, 15 under the March contract. For grain sorghum, about 25 under. If you look at Colby, on the other hand, the grain sorghum bid's 19 under, and the corn bid's 47 under. So we've got some geographic locational differences, but you do see some relatively strong grain sorghum bids even out in the western part of the state now.
Thanks for the comments, Dan, as always.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Along with us each Friday to talk grain market trends. That's K-State Research and Extension grain market economist, Dan O'Brien. Agriculture Today returns in a moment on this, the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You're listening to Agriculture Today from that Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference that K-State, along with the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association, co-hosted in Junction City this week. They covered a wide gamut of topics, of course, at this conference, as they do every year, this being the 21st such conference. Well, we've, ever since the advent of precision agricultural technology, had this question out there of what to do with that phenomenal amount of data that our farm equipment, our implements can gather. And that was part of the presentation of our guest now, an assistant professor of biological and agricultural engineering out of North Carolina State University. We talk now with Jason Ward. Jason, the orientation of your presentation, well, it was rather thorough, to say the least, because this is a deep subject as to managing all of this data. And one of the things that's out there, before we talk about how to use data, is the sharing of data and how it traffics through the system and the issues associated with that. How do you perceive those and their importance?
Well, I think that before we can collect the data and analyze it and use it to make real actionable decisions on your farm, we have to make its transference from the machine to your office or to your advisors as seamless and easy as possible. And that's where the connectivity really comes in. You know, a lot of this modern machinery, let's say model year 2008 and newer, already have a communications network built into them. And they most likely already have a means of sending that data off the machine to someone else to use. So hopefully you're the one capturing that data and getting real value from it.
And you described data, whether it be machine performance, whether it be what's happening with the distribution of inputs, what have you, as a natural resource. You might explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that we're creating from our farmland that has a real dollar value associated with it, just like the mineral rights or the oil extraction rights on your property. So we need to treat it as a resource. Now, what's interesting is if we look at that kind of analogy to where we collect all this data, and then it goes essentially to a refinery. Okay, so we're pulling all that raw information in, we store it, we hold it, and then we typically send it off to somebody else to create those kind of insights that we're willing to make decisions on. What's interesting is if we look at the crude oil analogy, the data goes in the front end, and there's a lot of different data products that come out the other end of it. And that could be everything from prescriptions, that could be work records that we need to share, that could be documents for our banker or our insurance agencies. So there's a lot of different data products and outcomes that come out of this raw data stream at the front end. Just like the refinery will make gasoline, aircraft fuel, tar for roads, etc., from the same crude oil input. So I think we need to think about it like that analogy, that it has a real dollar value, and we need to know who is extracting the value from it and who owns it.
Really, that is the next question then. As whichever entity refines that data, that means by definition the data is going to be shared. It will not be private, and that's a reality of the system and the situation, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And once we hand that file off, that raw data stream, to that processor, that refiner, they have that data on their machines, on their servers. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to be malicious in it, but that data, when you start aggregating data from multiple farmers, from different parts of the country, the value of that data increases, because that's the additional insights that we can see across production systems, weather patterns, ways that we use fertilizer or crop protectants. So the amount of insights that we can gain increases as we aggregate that data, and as we see different varieties and hybrids that are out there, and people are comparing head to head, and we can start doing that, with the same data. What's also interesting is how much I can describe about your farming operation without really even needing to know you as a farmer. So I can, if you were to tell me a planting date, a row spacing, and a target population, I've got a pretty good idea of what you planted, even if you don't tell me. So there's a lot of interesting insights that we can gather from looking at the data at 10,000 feet instead of 1,000 feet.
Of course, that prompts concerns in the minds of some producers about the security of the data and that more open access to it. It sounds like you would affirm to producers that they will gain more than they lose from this.
I think so. And we also have to remember that we're doing a calculation here on how much value do we get from the insight versus how much value do we get from the raw data. And so I made the comparison to using Alexa. Right? There's a time in our past as Americans where we would say, I don't want a recording device in my home. Right? But now, as we have adopted technology and gotten more comfortable with it, there's value to us in having that device there that can serve up music or weather or alarms to wake us up, or however we're using that. So we're making that exchange with that privacy of that data of what we talk about in our home for the value that we would get from that. So we're making that exchange in our homes whether or not we're making it with our farm data.
Now, we want to go through in brief here a few of the thoughts that you shared on what we can do with all of this data. There are several things here that are very practical. The efficiency of equipment and its operation in the field is one of those.
Yeah, exactly. And as we move forward to where we get to where we're understanding variable rate profitability and not just variable rate application, and we really start seeing how these decisions we make accumulate into dollars and cents, and then we can start seeing that on a spatial basis. We can know the areas of our field that made money or lost money. But the only way we do that is by understanding all the inputs that went into that one space. And that can be everything from fuel to operator time, maintenance on the equipment, applications that were made to it. And so by utilizing this data, we're much more likely to get a complete farm field operation model than what we were otherwise, just because we're listening to the machines whenever they're providing that data that's out there.
fuel consumption can be evaluated, and that could in turn blend over into operator characteristics, if you will, which might be a cause for some adjustment.
So if you're looking at a field and you've got fuel consumption data on that field area, and you see a difference between driver A and driver B on that field, it might be worth having a short turn row talk with your drivers and say, hey, we would much rather you run this gear setting or this throttle setting because we've seen that it gets us better fuel efficiency whenever we're doing these operations. And in the tight markets that we have now, every little penny counts.
And you cited this in your presentation as well. Some work has been done on equipment coverage over a given field, which can give a producer a clue as to whether that equipment they're operating is suitable to their field size, for instance, and so forth.
Yeah, Terry Griffin, who's here at Kansas State, and his team of graduate students do a lot of work in this area where they understand the weather variability and how that affects what's called the day suitable for field work. And whenever we have real information that says that this machine covers this many acres per hour or per day, rather than some kind of a rough estimate based on field size or ground speed rates, when we have that real data, we can better compare that and make better decisions.
And there's so many more possibilities here. One can gauge the wear and tear on their equipment, and that would get into how much service is required. But you concluded with your take on what's next in this arena. What leaps off the page and excites you about data collection, management, and utilization?
Yeah, so I really believe that we're going to move more towards optimization and uptime of equipment as a service. So whenever we're buying a piece of equipment, we may purchase a service plan with it. But now, instead of saying that we'll only get something fixed when it breaks, that they'll have enough analytics and predictive information about how that machine is performing that they'll be able to get to that machine before that equipment breaks. And if we can get to 100% uptime, especially during planting and harvest, whenever every minute counts, if we can get to where that breakdown does not happen during that time and we're managing it in a time that makes more sense for us in our operation, uptime as a service and optimization as a service for that equipment, I think, is going to be a real time saver for a lot of people.
And lastly, although you shared several other examples, equipment talking to each other, implements to tractors, combine A to combine B to grain cart C. All of this is very much within the realm of possibility and perhaps on the horizon.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if you look at some of the farm shows out there, even this last year and in the very near future, you'll see a lot more equipment that can communicate location, settings, different variables like ground speed or percentage of fill of a tank. So I think that having those machines talk to each other to optimize your field operations is very much within reach.
So in conclusion, Jason, we've come a long way in realizing just how we can make the best use of this data.
Oh, we have. And like I said, the linchpin of that is making sure we get it off your machine. That we don't just pile up all this data on these terminals or in your cab or in that drawer full of USB sticks. That we get it off your machine and we put it into a format, into a tool that makes sense for you to get real-world actionability out of it.
Great presentation at the conference along this line, and thank you for stepping aside and sharing a few of the highlights from it today, Jason.
My pleasure, Eric. Thank you.
He's out of North Carolina State University, an assistant professor of biological and agricultural engineering at NCSU. That's Jason Ward. He spoke at the 21st Kansas Agricultural Technologies Conference yesterday in Junction City, hosted by K-State Research and Extension and the Kansas Ag Research and Technology Association, or CARTA. We'll have more from the conference next week here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. Glad to have you aboard once again. Today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Attorneys representing farmers from across the country who filed multiple lawsuits alleging off-target dicamba damage to their crops will try to convince a federal panel of judges next week that the cases should be heard in a single court. The 7-judge U.S. Judicial Panel on Multi-District Litigation is slated to hear oral arguments next week in Miami, Florida, on a motion by attorneys representing producers in Kansas, Arkansas, Illinois, and Missouri to move all the cases to one court. The question at hand will be what venue would best serve the interests of all the litigants. Thousands of complaints have been made in at least 24 states by farmers alleging crop injury from dicamba-based products. Those manufactured by Monsanto, BASF, and DuPont. The lawsuits have sought the stoppage of sales of dicamba products under the names Ingenia, Fexapan, and Extendamax, and has also sought damages for crop losses. At the federal multi-district court, expected to consider moving the cases to one of 4 courts, including the Southern District of Illinois, the Eastern District of Missouri, the Eastern District of Arkansas, or the District of Kansas. Trade remains a hot-button issue for Washington and agriculture, and USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue says he thinks that President Trump has come around to see that NAFTA has been a positive for U.S. agriculture. The president probably left the campaign trail literally believing that NAFTA had not been good for any sector of the economy. In Perdue's words, in an interview with Bloomberg, he said, again quoting, "I think he has now come to realize that agriculture has been benefited by a NAFTA agreement." Perdue indicated he talks at least weekly now with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and other White House staff. Noting there has been some movement from Mexico in the talks, Perdue reiterated that Canada has been more reticent, but will come around as well, in his view. On trade issues in NAFTA relative to Canada, Perdue said they're coming to the point where they know they're going to need to address some of the issues that are on the table. However, Perdue reiterated in an interview with Reuters that terminating NAFTA may be the only way to get the best deal on the 24-year-old trade pact. JBS USA has now announced the sale of the world's largest cattle feeding operation, 5 Rivers Cattle Feeding, to affiliates of Pinnacle Asset Management. That sale valued at approximately $200 million. JBS USA has been shopping around for a buyer for 5 Rivers since last summer after JBS's Brazilian ownership got caught up in that political and bribery scandal in Brazil. 5 Rivers Cattle Feeding has feeding capacity for more than 900,000 cattle in 11 feed yards across Kansas, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Oklahoma, and Texas. While Pinnacle will take over the feeding operations, the news release from the two companies states that 5 Rivers will continue delivering fed cattle to JBS USA packing plants. Further, the current leadership at 5 Rivers, including President and CEO Mike Thoren, will remain in place, as will approximately 600 employees. Pinnacle is a New York-based firm focused on providing institutional investors a way to invest in commodity markets. It has approximately $2.3 billion under management. That sale comes 10 years after JBS bought Smithfield Beef Group, which included the 5 Rivers cattle feeding operations, as well as Smithfield Foods beef processing facilities. JBS has expanded the feeding operations since, about 10% over the last decade before agreeing to sell to Pinnacle. JBS USA will continue operating its beef and pork processing facilities in the U.S. The company is also the largest shareholder for Pilgrim's Pride, the largest poultry company in North America. You're tuned to Agriculture Today, and coming your way now, this week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop. As always, awaiting with that is Marcia Boswell. Marcia?
Between sports, clubs, volunteering, studying for the ACT and SAT, part-time jobs, chores at home, and just plain homework, most Kansas high school seniors are working toward building foundations for their future. For now, though, these students are making plans for college, and more importantly, how to pay for it. High school seniors pursuing careers in agriculture are encouraged to apply for the 2018 Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship. The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship was established in 2009 to honor Herb Clutter's influential role in organizing leadership groups on behalf of Kansas wheat producers and is administered by the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. The scholarship fund will award one $500 scholarship per year to a college or university-bound incoming freshman from Kansas pursuing a career in the field of agriculture. To be eligible for the scholarship, applicants must plan to be a full-time student at any 2- or 4-year Kansas college or university. Recipients will be selected based on academic achievement, leadership qualities, and career objectives focused around the field of agriculture. According to Jordan Hildebrand, Program Assistant for Kansas Wheat, the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers is proud to support the young men and women who are the future of the wheat industry. We are looking for students who are passionate about agriculture and not only excel in the classroom, but also in their communities and extracurricular activities. The Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship was established through a fund in memory of Herbert W. Clutter, a farmer from Holcomb, Kansas, and the first president of the National Association of Wheat Growers, which was established in 1948. Clutter encouraged Kansas wheat farmers to organize as a strong, unified voice, which led to the formation of the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers in 1952. He encouraged research and education and industrial uses of wheat, improved variety development, and methods to produce the best product at the lowest cost. Clutter's efforts led to the formation of the Kansas Wheat Commission by the Kansas Legislature in 1957. Applicants of the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship must complete the scholarship application, which includes a 400 to 500 word essay discussing why they have chosen to pursue a career in agriculture. The selection committee will use this essay along with the student's application in determining the scholarship winner. The scholarship and attached documents must be submitted to the Kansas Association of Wheat Growers at 1990 Kimball Avenue in Manhattan by March 2nd. For more information about the Herb Clutter Memorial Scholarship, please go to kansaswheat.org. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia. This is Agriculture Today. Kansas agricultural weather with Mary Knapp is next. This is the K-State Radio Network. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Now on Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather in review and a look ahead as well to the forecast for this next week and beyond. Along our way once again is research and extension climatologist at K-State, Mary Knapp. Well, Mary, our snows from this past weekend and into the early part of the week, well, they did provide at least enough moisture, you say, to exceed the norm for this date in some places in Kansas.
Well, if we look at the week ending on the 16th of January, the statewide average was above normal for the week, which is the first time we've been able to say that in a couple of months, actually. But it isn't enough to get very excited about. The average for the state was 0.18 of an inch, which is 0.04 of an inch more than we typically would see.
Not overwhelming, is it?
No, not by any means at all. And it wasn't evenly distributed, as is the custom in Kansas. It's never evenly distributed. But in this case, the tilt was towards the southern divisions with much lower amounts in the northern divisions, or at least as percentages of normal. What is noteworthy is that all of the divisions actually had measurable precipitation. The averages, the lowest in the northwest and north central was 0.05 of an inch, And the heaviest amount was in the South Central, where they saw 48/100ths of an inch on average. Again, very welcome, but not enough to make any inroads on our abnormally dry conditions. And indeed, it wasn't enough to slow the progression of some of our extreme drought. Southwest was not as blessed by the moisture as some of the other parts of the state, and even though they were 1.5 times their normal for the week, there's still only 6/100ths of an inch surplus out of that. So the extreme drought pushed a little bit further west in that region, and we did have an expansion of the severe drought. No change in the moderate drought, and not any in the abnormally dry. Actually, the moderate drought declined slightly, but that's deceptive because it went into severe and extreme rather than actually disappearing in any case.
For all intents and purposes, the drought has intensified in Kansas.
Definitely. And again, expansion of the extreme drought and expansion of the severe drought were the big culprits in that. And unfortunately, there's not much encouraging news on the horizon. The quantitative precip forecast for the week ending next Thursday is not particularly plentiful for much of the state. In fact, it's 0 to maybe a 100th of an inch, certainly less than a 10th of an inch for most of the region. The exceptions are the border counties along the Kansas-Nebraska border and along the Kansas-Missouri border. They may see as much as 1/4 of an inch, which of course would be really nice in northwest Kansas, but well short of what they should be seeing in southeastern Kansas.
And that will be the product of a system that's expected in the latter part of the weekend into early next week?
Yes, it is. We're looking at Sunday night into Monday night with our best chance of moisture. Again, chances are not extremely high at this point, mainly in the 40 to 60% range. And there's some question as to what form it will take, whether it'll be rain changing to snow, whether the timing of the arrival will be in the coldest part where it's all snow. That's still up in the air, so producers will want to watch that and check for the latest updates that will come as the storm is evolving.
And that's particularly of interest to our livestock producers, those who are calving right now and others, because if that's a freezing drizzle, that could put stress on that stock.
Right. The storm that we had this last weekend was one of the worst combinations. Yes, we liked the moisture, but a lot of it came as a very cold rain followed by rapidly plummeting temperatures. That cold rain penetrates the livestock's coat more readily and, again, stresses that livestock. And then you throw in the wind chills that we were seeing Monday of this week, and minus 20 degrees is definitely very cold. And, of course, livestock are influenced by those wind chills just as humans are.
Now, we finally, Mary, came out of the harsh cold last couple of days around Kansas, and as we progress here, we see these relatively warm temperatures holding on for a while, do we not?
Right. Looking at the next week, we are looking at highs in the lower 50s to upper 40s and lows in the 20s. So, again, more seasonal for this time of the year. There is a slight chance that the southwest will stay on the warmer than normal side of the coin, but again, not at this point looking as quite as warm as we saw last week.
The outlooks for February as well as the 3-month forecast have been posted, you say. Do they lend any optimism for moisture relief?
At this point, no. It's looking that we're going to see a continuation of the current pattern that we've seen most of this winter, with a slight bias towards warmer than normal temperatures, particularly in the western and southwestern parts of the state, and a bias towards drier than normal conditions in those same areas. Basically, they're expecting the La Nina pattern to continue through our spring season, and that tends to favor a zonal flow where the oncoming systems move laterally across the U.S. without any major dips in that. The Gulf moisture is looking like it's going to be setting up its northern trek just to our east. Louisiana and Missouri, particularly eastern Missouri, are likely to be wetter than normal, and that will continue up into the Ohio River Valley. But all across the Gulf Coast, drier than normal, and that, again, doesn't favor progression into our area. We are watching the systems that are starting to show up in Southern California. They actually have a cold storm advisory for Los Angeles this weekend. The reason we want to monitor those is because if that pattern shifts and we get more of that in Southern California, that increases the possibility of a four-corner storm. For us, four-corner storms are fairly nice because there's a better chance that that Gulf moisture will pull a little bit further west and favor us in the Plains region. At this point, it's not very pronounced, but that's something that can give us maybe a ray of hope that something will develop out of that.
We would welcome that surprise. We'll see if that materializes. Enjoy your weekend. Mary, thanks for being along with us as always.
Thanks, Eric.
K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. And to you as well, a good weekend. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. Over this, the K-State Radio Network.